Welcome to Noon Hour Philosophers. I'm Ken Melchert, your host. And our schedule, I had a few there, I think they're gone. I started the schedule for the first, I got like most of February committed, January and February. We start the first Wednesday again after New Year's Day. And the schedule is on Facebook, Noon Hour Philosophers. You don't have to be a member or sign in. Noon Hour Philosophers. It will be in the Post-Crescent, and it's in the newsletter of First English Lutheran, and I'll get it on a couple more calendars. I will get more months. It isn't that we end in February. That's when I have the commitments and speakers all lined up, and I'm working on the rest.
Do we have a meeting next week?
No, this is it. This is the final meeting for the 21st. Next week is, I hope you're all busy with Thanksgiving and Christmas. I hope you have parties to go to, you know, whatever. So this is it until January. And I appreciate the help of First English Lutheran, their hall and their tech support. I don't think there's anybody here from the church, but I'm going to make a gift to them for all that they do for this group. And we're not the only community organization that they support. On a personal note, our family business, the Harp Gallery, will be celebrating 40 years this week. Tomorrow from 4 to 7, we have an open house. My wife Rebecca, whom many of you know, will be playing the harp. I will be doing some appraisals. There will be refreshments. And it's 4 to 7 at the Harp Gallery. We're now in Kaukauna, actually. It's on Highway 41. And you're invited. Bring a friend if you like. Now, who was not here last week? Okay, a bunch of people. Then I would like to introduce the speaker. This is part 2, as most of you know. And we have Robert Sanaski, who has a degree in economics from the University of Detroit and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's a retired marketer, economist, and international business executive who traveled the world for nearly 40 years. He began his international business career with the Kohler Company, and after 16 years with Kohler, he went on to executive positions with 4 multinational corporations. He retired in 2003 as the chief executive officer of the North American operations of a German multinational corporation. For the last 8 years, he's been a geoeconomics lecturer in the Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay, where he's lectured on forces of change in the 21st century with the theme, Money Makes the World Go Round. His lectures are focused on the U.S. economy and the national debt problem. Many of you heard him here last year. China's rising threat to U.S. hegemony, consequences of Russia's Ukraine invasion, demographic trends impacting the world economic future. Bob Stronaski.
Thank you. Let's pick up where we left off with a review, though, because some of you didn't catch the first part of this, if you don't mind. So, the challenges that China is facing, internal as well as external challenges. And the internal challenges are endemic corruption.
Is that speaker working?
Is it working?
Yeah, I can.
Can you hear?
No, just a little
Do I-
louder.
I'll speak louder.
Okay.
All right. Well, I tell me, stop hollering. I'm hollering. All right. So there are all kinds of problems that China has. Every country has its own problems. But just to go through the ones that we talked about before as kind of a summary. Party purges, endemic corruption, which has always been part of China, and for the most part, lots of underdeveloped countries. The other one is they have rising debt, and we talked about that. It's been rising very, very rapidly for this country. Property developer debt, remember we talked about how it was 30% of the growth of the economy at one period of time. They overbuilt, and you saw pictures of all those actually small cities that are uninhabited because the developers went wild, and many of them are now in bankruptcy. Factory overproduction. as we'll talk about again, they have 45% of the world's factory production capability. They just keep making stuff. And then they have inadequate domestic consumer spending. So while they have 1.4 billion people, those people do not have the consumer spending ability that we have in the West here. And deflation, as a result of overproduction and not enough domestic demand, prices are going down. And when you get caught in that trap, as we talked about, prices are going down, so why should I buy today because it'll be cheaper tomorrow, right? Yep. And guess what? When everybody does that, prices are cheaper tomorrow because they've got excess production. When you get caught in a trap like that, when a country gets caught in a trap like that, you can't stop it unless there is central government interference in it to try and stop it. Otherwise, the economy really crashes. That's what happened, of course, during the Great Depression. And then they have high youth unemployment. 19% unemployment for the youth of China, which is a problem. It's a problem in any country. Although their overall unemployment rate is not outrageous. It's about 5.5%. So that's the internal problem, okay? Long-term population decline, as we said, but this is a long-term problem that doesn't affect them today, okay? But long-term problem, they are well below replacement rate in their population. You need a fertility rate of...
Can you hold the microphone about 2 inches lower? Pops.
All right, good. I can go low. Well, I used to be able to. So the long-term outlook for them is they have population decline. Now, when you have 1.4 billion people, and right now they're losing about a million people a year, but that's going to accelerate because they don't have young people. They're not producing young people to any large extent. So that's the internal problems. The external problems are Tiananmen Square, remember in 1989, remember that young man who was standing in front of the tank? That was kind of an uprising by the young people of the country. And they put it down, and they said only a few hundred people lost their lives, but the rest of the world knows they probably massacred several thousand people to put down that uprising. Hong Kong, they never kept their promise. I love Hong Kong. They were going to allow 2 systems, 1 country. They prosecuted so many people. They changed it. They put people in jail. They changed it, never kept their promises. And then the Uyghur suppressions that you may be somewhat aware of, these are the Muslims that are in that country, and they have persecuted them mercilessly. And the world, but the point is that the world is aware of this. The world has seen this, all right? And it has, so what they have done in those instances lives in the memories and the attitudes of people outside of that country. The South China Sea disputes, which we talked about, and I'll talk about again and show you just in case you forgot what that's about. And then the military buildup that they have done in the South China Sea and around there. And they've been building up their Navy. They now have more ships in their Navy than any other country in the world. Okay. Their Belt and Road bad experiences of countries that signed up for that, 151 countries, where they're helping these countries build ports and highways and high-speed rail, and the countries can't afford what they built because, and the other part of that, of course, is they loaned them the money, and they use Chinese contractors to build it, to design it, and Chinese workers to come in and actually build it. And in many, many of those instances, the projects that they built are not sustainable financially they can't operate with enough revenue to pay off the loans. So they've gotten a bad reputation for these Belt and Road projects. That notwithstanding, they're still doing it. The demand for them is falling off, but they're still creating them. Foreign markets flooded with Chinese products. It used to be the cheap products. Now it's, they build quality products, But they've got so much production, as I said, 45% of the world's production capacity, and they're still building that, making that stuff, and they're exporting like crazy. And what gives is, of course, the prices. So you can buy one of the finest electric cars in the world, in China, made by China, for $10,000 today. And that's what it would be here too, right? They have a declining rate of foreign investment because, of course, it's pretty well developed from that standpoint. More importantly, the companies that have invested in the past now, to a large extent, particularly if they have corporate secrets, their own methods of doing things, the Chinese have found a way to take possession of those things, so they're not trusted anymore. And then there's the U.S. tariff war, with which I assume you're familiar, but if you're not, you're going to be. All right, because we're going to talk about that. And then so overall, there's a distrust of China and where it wants to go. And it's not ill-founded, because Xi Jinping says his objective is to make the rest of the world dependent upon China financially. That's the long term. The Chinese dream, as we talked about, the Chinese dream is to restore China to where it was in 1800. All right? And from 1800 to 1912 was the Qing dynasty, and they accounted for over a third of the world's economy. Back in the 1800s, 1700s, the big economies in the world were India and China. They accounted for 50% of the world's economy. So the Qing dynasty, as I pointed out before, lasted 268 years. Nothing is forever. We're going to celebrate our 250-year anniversary. So we need to think about those things, okay? So, during their development, this country grew so fast, so significantly, that they accomplished something that probably has never ever been accomplished in world history. Growing at the rate of about 10% a year for almost 30 years. And they accomplished the things that Xi Jinping set out in 2015. He had a 10-year plan, and he said, these are the things that we want to accomplish. And these are the phenomenal things that they have accomplished. They are, of course, world number one in factory capacity. They are number one in production of steel and aluminum. Shipbuilding. They dominate the solar supply chain worldwide. 5G communication equipment, which is, and by the way, all the roads and high-speed rail and their freeway system, which would be equivalent to our interstate system, was built, of course, in the 2020s and before that, and it is twice as long as the United States. Interstate system, its high-speed rail system is now about 29,000 miles. The high-speed rail travels at approximately 200 miles an hour, and the first one went into service in 2007. That's how fast they have developed all of this. Consumer electronics, we all know that. This is probably right there. Active pharmaceutical ingredients, which most people are not familiar with, but they produce many of the ingredients that go into finished drugs in the United States, like Tylenol. If they stopped shipping their ingredients, you wouldn't have Tylenol anymore, all right? Robotics, they have more robots in their factories per 10,000 workers than any other countries in the world other than South Korea and Singapore. They have taken that to a new level. High-speed trains, as I just said, ocean port construction, and rare earth minerals and magnets. You may have heard something about that. If they didn't ship the rare earth minerals and magnets that they have about a 90% market share on to the United States, every piece of equipment, including F-35 fighters, are dependent upon these, including many of the functions in your automobile. So that's what they've accomplished. They have become the world's technological powerhouse. And they have created an innovation ecosystem centered on electricity and a digital network. They have built the most extensive, new, durable national electric power grid in the world. As we talked about before, we have this crazy grid system in the United States that is not very dependable in most cases. There's the east and the northeast grid, the mid-Atlantic grid, and even Texas has its own grid, right? This is built for durability. It's totally integrated, and I assure you it's probably well protected for whatever may come in the future, and it's brand new. They generate more electricity annually in this country than the United States and the European Union combined. 30% of the energy that is used in China is electric energy, and they're continuing to expand it. And they are the world's leader now in nuclear power generation. We talked about 2 new power plants that were started in the United States in Georgia that took 7 years and were billions of dollars over budget. In that time frame, China built 13 of those, the same type, right? And they are now exporting this nuclear knowledge and these plants to other places in the world, and they're starting to provide electrical power in countries in in Africa. They have more wind turbines and solar panels installed last year than the entire rest of the world. Okay. And Chinese companies, as I said, are building electric vehicle and battery factories in Brazil, Thailand, Morocco, Hungary, and other places around the world. They are dominating right now the electric vehicle market worldwide, and they are intending to continue that domination because they believe that's where the whole world is going to go anyway. And they're probably right. All right, Xi Jinping came into power in China in 2012 and completely changed the way China operates relative to the rest of the world. Up until that point in time, the Communist Party was in the background, funding these interstate systems and high-speed rail systems. But for the most part, its economy was a capitalist economy. Deng Xiaoping, who came into leadership in 1978, to recall, the country had been under Mao Zedong, and millions of people were starving. It was horrible. Right? Deng Xiaoping came in and said, we've got to do something about this. So, inch by inch, and then it exploded, introduced capitalism into the country. And that's when all the investment came pouring in, particularly from the U.S., and they started manufacturing just about everything possible. And it continued that way. As a matter of fact, there was one of the leaders the Chinese were very friendly to the rest of the world, obviously. The rest of the world was happy to see this juggernaut become a capitalist country, all right? And looking at it saying, well, the Communist Party really doesn't play a significant role anymore. As a matter of fact, one of the leaders was on 60 Minutes in the United States, and because he loved Elvis Presley songs, so he was singing Love Me Tender, and he could also recite the Gettysburg Address from memory. But that changed when Xi Jinping became the leader of China in 2012, when he said their objective was the Chinese people want to restore the Chinese dream. And the Chinese dream was what? In 1800, when it basically had the most powerful economy in the world, 33% or more of the world's economy. And that's the objective. China must again become self-reliant across all sectors of its economy. That's secondly, the world's economies will become increasingly dependent on China and its financial institutions. That's where they're going. That's where he's taking them. And that's what he has been doing. And you're seeing some of the results here that we just went through, and you saw that before. China will replace the United States as the world's economic power. The greatest economy in the world in the future will be China, no longer the United States, if he accomplishes all his goals. And so he's told the world where they want to go, shown us how they want to do it, and they're working on it. Right? So, it's economic aggression versus huge resistance from the Western Alliance and our Pacific allies. Going back to the things that we talked about in terms of their external challenges, the rest of the world doesn't trust Xi Jinping and doesn't trust China. Nevertheless, so when you're confronted with this, if you're the United States, what should you do? Well, you just saw that, it's an attack on the United States, right? China will replace the United States as the world's financial powerhouse, if you will. What do? It seems pretty simple. You keep your friends close, right? All right? You band together against a common enemy. We're talking about Japan, we're talking about the Philippines, but we're also talking about the European Union, we're talking about Canada, Mexico, South America, all these friends of the United States since the end of the Second World War. You band together and you hold them close, right? And you say we have this enemy and we need to work against that. Not in terms of a war by any means, but this is an attack on a system that we created, you and we together at the end of the Second World War. This interrelationship, this interdependence economically that we thought then, and we were right, would prevent the Third World War. And we would not go back to, for example, a Second World War only 20 years after the end of the First World War. Can't have that, right? So that's what we did. Well, we didn't do it, all right? So the red is my comment, all right? How to really fracture alliances. The second one, the dumbest trade war in history, is from the Wall Street Journal, which is not known to be a particularly liberal newspaper, right? And on the bottom here is, this is the biggest change to global trade in 100 years. And it was, of course, actually took place on what a famous person in Washington called Liberation Day on April 2nd of this year. Doing that. Tariffs against every country in the world, all 192 countries. This is not holding your friends close. Right. So, as I said, and these are my words, it's a gift to Mr. Xi Jinping. All right, the gift that just keeps giving. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. You've heard that before. So what are all these people doing, our friends? How are they reacting to this? Particularly after we imposed, for example, South Korea. They had overall import duties of about 1.2%, and we hit them with 46%. Okay? So what did they do? Well, this is what the forecasts are right now. And that is that this is the BlackRock Investors newsletter said, we expect tariffs to lower growth and boost inflation globally. It's doing that, all right? The International Monetary Fund warns that full-blown trade war could significantly slow global growth, there are signs that's happening now, okay? And the World Bank projects that that's going to happen too. So the world is slowing down because of us. It's slowing the world's economy down, and inflation is hitting across the board. And we've just seen the beginning of it in the United States. It's going to get more serious. U.S. trade war is estimated, according to the World Bank, is estimated to cost households in 2025, when it's fully enforced, about $1,300 in additional cost imposed by the tariffs. And the world is reacting defensively. Defensively against what we've done, not necessarily China, which was the initial threat. And we have all these alliances that we built over time, like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Quad. We have been instrumental in creating these organizations. Once again, to make us interdependent so that differences are over economics. It is not settled with guns and missiles, right? We strengthened our military alliances with these countries in that area. NATO, of course. The European Union, Canada, Mexico. And Canada and Mexico were the first ones that we hit with import tariffs, right? So these are the ones. So what are they doing now? These allies of ours, these organizations are saying, we're going to have to deal with both of these people. And now the United States is basically in the same bucket as China. Neither one of them are our friends anymore if they're going to treat us that way. So now they have to play both ends against the middle, and that's what I see happening, and that's what we see around the world. So our friends are looking at trade policies and seeing what they can do. So this is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, okay? When this was put together, and by the way, we created this and then we didn't join it because certain elements this was created just before a presidential election in the United States, and a significant part of one party's backing objected to this. So we didn't join it, but it exists today. And as you can see, what it was designed to do is to encircle the Pacific Ocean in an economic alliance that would have been led by the United States as protection against China. Okay? But the lady in this picture is Ursula von der Leyen, who is the head of the European Union. And as you can see here, she's meeting with Xi Jinping. They have decided that somehow they need to get along with China and get along with the United States under these adverse circumstances. So where before they were extremely defensive, now they're looking at it and saying, we have to find a way to work in the middle. Okay? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Canada lays the groundwork to pivot away from the United States because of the tariffs. They're actually considering lifting tariffs on imported Chinese electric cars. Remember we talked about that big ocean port, Chancay Port in Peru, in South America? It is the largest port on the west coast of South America. And of course, the Chinese government built this port. It was built in the last year. These are new electric cars being imported into South America through that port. And as I mentioned before, BYD, the Build Your Dream, is the name of the company. The #1 Chinese electric vehicle manufacturer is building a car and a battery plant in Brazil. China is really becoming extremely influential in South America. Then there's the BRICS. The BRICS are, this is an acronym for, guess what? Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But it was originally just BRIC. This was formed early in the 2000s, and these were these were underdeveloped countries that had huge potential that band together, and they got this name of the BRICS, okay? Today, they have expanded. They've got additional countries that have joined with them. They have, if you're not interested in the other statistics up there, 30% of the world's petroleum oil, okay? And they have established at the very beginning that their objective is to displace the US dollar as the world's currency. Not necessarily the Chinese yuan, but to get out from under the US dollar. And then, of course, to make matters worse, after all of that, we decided to put an additional 50% tariff on Brazil, right, because we didn't like what they did with their former president, and because the leader of Modi in India did something that we didn't like, so we put an additional 50% tariff on those two countries. These are major, major countries, and these are countries that are growing, 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 and these are countries that China is becoming friendly with, right? So Brazil leans east. De Silva, their new president, said, you know, we want to get along with everybody, all right? We're going to strengthen our partnerships with everybody. We are not going to be beholden to any one country, although, as you can see, China has a growing, growing influence in Brazil. He said he wants to be a partner with all nations willing to do business with them. This is Modi, and of course the other guy you recognize is the guy from Russia, Mr. Putin. All right. There they are getting together with Mr. Xi Jinping. So, those BRICS countries, they have grown. As you can see over on the right in green, Brazil, which was not in the top 10 countries in the world back in the year 2000, is now a player, okay? And they're in 10th place. India is now the 4th largest economy in the world, right? China is the 2nd largest economy in the world. This is a big impact on the world's economy and what happens. So China, South Korea, and Japan agreed to a free trade agreement, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. We have to find a way to get along with both of these if you're a country to our advantage. We don't care what these other guys, right? So they do $800 billion a year in trade, okay, which is 25% of the world's total economy, these countries, all right? So they formed this regional bloc. And in that context, America's tariffs are likely to deepen the participation of Japan and South Korea in this regional integration, although there's new news, and we'll talk about that shortly, because Japan has a new leader. All right? So will this lead, are we going to just have a continuing tariff war? Is that going to go on? Because what it's doing is it's decreasing the world's economy. It's having a depressing effect on the world's economy. It's causing inflation around the world. As I said, this is the biggest thing that's happened in 100 years negatively to the world's economy. It ain't good, right? But here's what we're talking about in terms of potential for military conflict, right? Of course, this is Japan over here, South Korea, right? This and Taiwan. Taiwan is, as you recall, is not, it's a big deal, but it's not big. It's the 5.3% the size of the state of Texas, 23 million people. Okay, the Philippines, okay, down here we have Australia, Singapore, Malaysia. This is the Indian Ocean, okay? Why is that so important? Because this is the South China Sea, all right? This is international waters, which China has now claimed as their own, okay? So the red line that you see here, China says, this is China, okay? you have to give it to the Vietnamese. They are spunky people, right? Because they have the blue line here and they say, no, we're going to take it, right? So this is ours. They're not going to. But we have the Philippines over here, and this should be free passage for all ships because it's international waters, right? And the problem is, what's going on here? Okay, we have a problem. What's going on? While he's doing that, the problem is this, that a huge amount of the world's, the cheapest way to ship anything in the world is on the water. It has always been that way from the day of Columbus, right? Second is by rail. So approximately 25% of the world's total $50 billion in the South China Sea to build a military base. They've also, these were just little shoals around here. These circles indicate the amount of money that they have spent on these shoals, building them up, dredging, and putting landing strips on most of them, okay? So they've done that. Of course, over here is the Philippines, right? And here's Malaysia. So you see what they've done. Now, ships are still passing through here. Right? It's still relatively free, but they use these waters to harass the Philippines with their military vessels as well as Taiwan. This is not moving forward. Oh, here it is. Here's the point. Here's the real point. All right, so this is what we were just looking at. This is the South China Sea, the East China Sea. Right? This is a huge amount of shipping that comes down here through the Taiwan Straits. This is Taiwan here. Comes down here, goes through this place south of Singapore, and between Singapore and Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, the Straits of Malacca, right, into the Indian Ocean. This is the Straits of Hormuz, okay? This is where the vast majority of the world's oil and gas comes from in ships. It comes down here, and it all goes up through the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal, and into the Mediterranean. 80% of the world's shipping trade goes through here. If you control this and this, you control 80% of the world's shipping and over 25% of the world's economy. And that's what they're doing here in the South China Sea with what they've been building. Okay? So that is critical. So, what happens if there's a conflict? This is so critical, one can't conceive of there not being some sort of a military conflict if in fact China said you can't go through here anymore. Right? At the same time, remember we talked about the Belt and Road Initiative, China helping these countries build ports and railroads and all that. Well, these are ports that they help these countries build, okay? With the exception of the one that Djibouti, which is here, which is right at the entrance to the Red Sea. They have a military installation there. But just about everybody, every country in the world has one there. We have a military. This is a little country that has nothing other than land that they lease to these countries to build their military bases. It's the best deal in the world for that little country, right? All right? Because it's so critical to worldwide shipping. But the Chinese refer to all of these ports as their string of pearls because these could be converted to naval bases virtually overnight and control the Indian Ocean. And all of that shipping, if we get into a conflict with them, pretty serious, isn't it? So, Kevin Rudd, who was the Prime Minister of Australia, lived as a child good deal of his life in China, is a China expert, and was the, as I said, the Prime Minister of Australia. He also was Australia's, worked with the ambassador to the United Nations, and is now the ambassador to the United States. And he and our chief executive don't get along very well. But in 2022, he wrote this. 2022, he wrote it, okay? The dangers of catastrophic conflict between the U.S. and Xi Jinping's China. He wrote that book, and it's an excellent book. He has 10 scenarios in here, in that book, about what is likely to happen or could happen, how to avoid the war, and how it might take place, right? And what he wrote is this: unless China is willing to scale back its ambitions, and Washington is willing to accept being number 2 in the Pacific region, an accident at sea, a cyber attack, or something like that could set off a military conflict. It's very touching. Graham Allison, who is a professor in the School of Government at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, wrote this book in 2017. So even before the tariffs and all that, he wrote this. He said, "Can America and China escape Thucydides' trap?" Let me tell you what Thucydides' trap is. Well, Thucydides lived in the 5th century BC, when Sparta and Athens in Greece were city-states. Right? Sparta was an authoritarian, we would call conservative today, but in Athens, which was the first democracy, home of Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, was wide open and becoming increasingly popular. So they were in conflict more and more so as Athens grew. So these people decided that the only way to settle this was, they decided amongst them that they would have a war. And they did. So Thucydides wrote a book called The History of the Peloponnesian War, which is that. They fought for 30 years and destroyed both of them. Okay? But Thucydides was very fortunate because he was an Athenian general and he lost his first battle, so they threw him out. So he spent the next 20 years documenting everything that happened in the Peloponnesian War. And that book, The History of the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides, is used in virtually every military academy around the world today, including our own. Right? And so, what is Thucydides' trap? Because this is what he identified as a potential problem. A deadly pattern of structural stress that results when a rising power, read China, challenges a ruling one, the United States. And professor studied history for the last 500 years. And he said, over the last 500 years, these conditions occurred 16 times. And out of those 16 times, 12 of them resulted in wars. He also said, today, as an unstoppable China approaches an immovable America, and Xi Jinping and the American president both declare that they are going to make their countries great again, that this is going to be the 17th, whether it results in war or not. Okay, so here's trade war or hot war. Is it going to be over magnets, tariffs, rare earths, pharmaceuticals, or is it going to be in the South China Sea? Is it going to be with because of North Korea or Taiwan? All right. These tensions are flaring over and over again, particularly with Taiwan. And Japan's new, I'm going to wrap this up, Japan's new president, who's a very strong lady and a nationalist, made some statements that, well, she said, let's see, if the new prime minister said that this is just 2 days ago, 3 days ago, military action by China against Taiwan would justify a military response by Japan. That's a no-no. Because don't forget that China was occupied by the Japanese during the Second World War, and if there ever were two peoples who hate each other over here, historically, these are the two, all right? So, and China responded as well. So, and what she's basically saying is that we will militarily come to the aid of Taiwan if in fact China takes military action against Taiwan. And Taiwan is part of China. It is part of China, right? So this is one of those instances. Remember he was saying, what will happen? What could trigger one of these wars? What could result in a military conflict? Stuff like this, okay? So Japan is going to have to back off. And one thing, I don't know if you, these are two peoples who have great need for respect by someone else. You cannot, for example, if you're negotiating with the Chinese, okay, which I've done, you need to make sure that you leave them with a victory. They need to have face, all right? You can't engage in a zero-sum game thing. So when you're doing negotiations, you do all your preparation. First thing you do is you show that you understand what the game is all about, you understand their culture, and then you figure out what they want out of this negotiation. You know what you want, and then you decide to put something in there that you are willing to give away, to give them face, and they will recognize it, and they'll do something for you. But face is very important. Respect is what it's called, all right? And both of these countries and both of these nations are like that, and this is about one of the worst things that you could do. So I'm sure they're going to back off. So will China and America escape Thucydides' trap? So I leave you there because I don't have an answer to that. Now, your questions, I promised to leave some time. Yes?
Yeah, you mentioned about the importance of saving face, but it almost seems that it goes one way. China has to save face, but they don't seem to care about other countries saving face. So how do you deal with that?
Well, I'm talking about negotiations, okay? Their actions are one thing, but the way they are approaching it and the way they're talking and how they're handling it diplomatically is not to insult the United States. It's to say this is what we're going to accomplish. It's not to say that the United States is a terrible country, all right? But, you know, Xi Jinping has his own way of doing that. So I'm just talking about my experience over the years. If you're going to negotiate with the Chinese or the Japanese, but the Chinese are much better negotiators than the Japanese are. When I first started traveling internationally, a long, long time ago, I met an old trader. And he said, I want to tell you something, Bob. He said, the best negotiators in the world are the Chinese and the Persians. The Persians, of course, are the Iranians. And if you don't do your homework, if you don't learn their culture, all right, and if you don't exhibit in the way you conduct yourself and talk that you are aware of their culture, you're going to go into the negotiations and you're going to come out and think that you won and you won't have any clothes on. All right. But if you do a deal with either one of these countries, traditionally, and I found it out, even if it's not on paper, they end up making that something happens that their side of the deal is bad, they will live with it. They will absolutely live with it. Right? Xi Jinping is taking this to a new level. And I didn't repeat your question, and I'm sorry for that. Yes, ma'am.
I understand that China has bought many huge swaths of properties in the United States in which they're planning on putting data centers up at. That's going to be kind of scary in the future when they have all this AI technology that they're running through the United States.
I don't know anything about them planning to build data centers in the United States, nor would they be able to pass the regulations and get the licenses to do that. I'm not saying
Wisconsin's fast forwarding all that stuff right now.
Yep.
You know, don't forget, Chinese companies own property in the United States. They own farms and all that.
Yep.
But also, they interviewed a soybean farmer from Iowa just the other day. And he's running their soybean farm in Iowa while his father went down to Brazil and is a major soybean farmer in Brazil. And those soybeans are going to China. So yeah, American companies can operate in China. We allow foreign companies and countries to buy assets in the United States. Remember back in the 70s or 80s when we said, oh my God, Japan is buying the United States. They own Hawaii. And they're going to be the biggest economy in the world. It didn't happen, right? But so I don't know about the data centers. I really don't. I would question whether they'd be able to be licensed, given the conflict between the two countries. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I don't understand the rationale why China would want to get into a war with the United States. Aren't we one of their biggest markets?
Right. So why would China want to get into a war with the United States? I don't understand. I don't think they would want to get into the war. And what the professor is saying and others are saying is when you have these tensions, it's not like the Greeks, all right, who decided to go to war. It's going to be some stupid thing that's going to occur, right? Like
I heard it was on the internet, the University of Wisconsin sponsored it, and they said the biggest challenge between China and us is who's going to control artificial intelligence. The battle winner will have a big step up on running the world.
Well, one of the things, I'm just reading it.
So who do I believe?
Well, what's happening now is what's happening. And it's unfortunate. I just was reading a couple of essays by professors here. And what they're saying is that in terms of what we, the United States, we have been the leader in technology, all right? We, the internet, all these other things. We have been the leader because we've had the intellectual capabilities, we've had the universities. In medicine, we've had the National Institute of Health and all that. And this guy said, you know, think of a country as flying at 30,000 feet, you know, and nothing is as you planned it, so you have to make adjustments. So right now, intellectually and developmentally, with respect to those, the United States is flying at 30,000 feet and taking pieces of its plane and dropping them down, right? Because China has some of the greatest universities in the world. Education is #1, research is #1 with them, and we are backing away from that type of thing. We're defunding a lot of research in the United States that we shouldn't be, because that's been our leadership, that's been our core for so long. We've led the world in development of drugs and all kinds of things, right? So that's a concern. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
What role does cyber have in this whole conflict?
Oh my goodness. What role does cyber have in this conflict? Right now, well, I don't know if you're familiar with the amount of cyber hacking and blackmailing that's going on in this country, from little towns to hospital systems or whatever, right? Cyber hacking is proliferating. We, as a country, are obviously hacking other countries, probably their military stuff. But China has developed the capability to do that, and Russia has developed the capability to be really good at it. And that's why when I get back to the electrical, if you want to bring this country to its knees, what would you do? Without firing a shot.
Hunger and electricity.
Yep. Bring its electric grid down. And you can do that piecemeal. And these are so vulnerable with, you know, because they're so disjointed. They're privately held for the most part. So cyber is a huge, it's a weapon. It is a phenomenal weapon. And it is likely that we're going to have conflicts based upon that, or triggered by that, there may be anything else, other than in the South China Sea. Yes, ma'am.
So if we back off from these tariffs, for whatever reason, are people gonna trust us again?
We would have to conclude that the damage that we've done is probably insurmountable, maybe decades and decades and decades, because we've gone through this now, all right? This is, and it goes back, Vladimir Putin justified some of the things that he did, that he's done in his invasion of Ukraine. And he said, oh, you're holier than thou. Did you invade Iraq? Did you invade Afghanistan? You invaded Iraq, you invaded Afghanistan and stayed for 20 years. We tried that. They tried it in the 80s and they left. And they said, so don't tell us about invading other countries because you've done it, all right? So it's really, really difficult. For the United States to reestablish its integrity is going to take some time, all right? But one of the things that we've got to do is get rid of this whole tariff war. It's very, from an economic standpoint, it's totally destructive of the world's economy. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, it's me?
Yeah, you.
I question that tariff thing. As an economist, why do countries have tariffs? Because other countries have tariffs on us, correct?
Yes.
And we had some of the smallest tariffs on other countries before Trump, correct?
Not necessarily true.
Okay.
No.
Then that's my misunderstanding.
Our overall tariff average was about like 2%.
Right.
Okay, and so we tariff certain things because, for the most part, it may be it has a lot to do with lobbying, if you will. Okay, to protect my industry. But what has happened over the decades is that, because of the World Trade Organization and all these organizations, the belief that and people will take issue with that, you let the world competence, so our competence might be this, all right? So if you take away the tariffs, okay, what will happen is the world will be better off because the cost of living will go down, all right? And the world's economy will be more productive, all right? There are exceptions to that, okay? You can find little exceptions here. But the generalization that we had the lowest tariffs in the world and the rest of the world had higher tariffs on us is not accurate. You can find instances of that. But for the most part, we were almost not tariff-free, but they were very marginal, and they may have been to protect one little portion of a country's economy that they wanted protected. But all of it was hammered out in the World Trade Organization, and there were rules, all right? So we were not being victimized by the rest of the world. But I'll tell you this, as a result of, before the tariffs, we had the lowest cost of living in the United States than any other developed country, right?
It's changed.
We really did. And that's changing now. Yes, sir, back there.
I don't know if the tariff war was caused by the absolute numbers of tariffs in comparison to ours on other countries or theirs on ours, as much as it was by trade balances. But do you think we could possibly see what's going to happen with the tariffs that have been levied in a course of 4, 5, 6 months? I don't mean from now. I mean from when they were applied to today.
I'm not sure that I do. Well, the federal government has collected something like $300 billion in tariff.
What I'm after is, I don't think that, let me put it this way, I think it's very hard to predict what this tariff situation is going to be. I don't think it's going to be tariffs at the levels that we're seeing them right now. This is simply to rebalance inequities that have been growing for years. This pertains to the BRIC situation that you mentioned also. yes, the BRIC countries, that alliance was formed in the early 2000s. And you're right, nothing has been done since then until recently. I would suggest that a lot of the things that are taking place in our government today are aimed at balancing a lot of the inequities you've talked about today in the long term to again leave us in a position, a favorable position globally with our alliances and with our cost of living here domestic.
Well, the origins of this trade war and these tariffs, I heard what you said, all right, and that's great theory. But the reason that we have these tariffs is that the current president of the United States believes in tariffs and goes back to the McKinley era when the country, and until 1913, the United States actually financed the federal government on tariffs, right? Now, the imbalance of trade that you're talking about, we have had an imbalance of trade forever, and it does not have a deleterious effect on the United States. That's a merchandise trade. In services trade, we have a surplus, okay? Right? So,
It does.
and that's what those crazy tariffs are.
It does harm us. That's why
No, it doesn't. How?
most of our manufacturing went offshore, and we're starting to bring it back.
When you bring, okay, I'm going to answer that, and then I think we need to go. When you bring that, the reason that the manufacturing went offshore.
Lecturing, you're doing a wonderful job, but there are two sides to the story.
Right, the reason the manufacturing went offshore is that they were able to produce the products much cheaper in that country, right? To reshore that meant that the indigenous company could not produce those products at those prices, right? So when they come back, and it's happened over time, there's plenty of evidence, when it comes back, the prices of those products are equal to or greater than the foreign product with the tariffs on them, because we can't produce them at them. So the inflation rate that you're going to experience is going to be about the same. You cannot produce those products that are produced in China for the same cost. So in the United States, it's going to cost that much more. That cost plus the tariffs, and it's still going to cost the American public much more money. That's why they were produced there.
You know, this discussion.
So I think we need to end it, but we can talk afterwards. Thank you very much.
Just a brief discussion. Bob has a series of short discussions exactly about tariffs, going semantically and formulaic through what is its effect on us. And he's done a series of short discussions, and you can find it on YouTube. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope you wrote this out. Thank you very much.